All right. Let me give everybody just a minute. All right. Welcome, welcome. I am Kristen. I'm one of the admin here at Bookish Pen Pals, and I have the pleasure to be talking with award-winning author and photojournalist. Well, no, not photojournalist, photographer, adventurer, and you've also been known to be called the Indiana Jones of photography, which I just love, Jeannee Sacken. Welcome, Jeannee.
Thank you so much for having me here this evening. This is lovely.
I just finished Behind the Lens today, so I'm hoping that we get to talk about the Annie Hawkins series and some of your photography. And I'm a teacher, so I was thrilled to read that you were also a professor at one time and talk a little bit about that as well. So, tell us about the Annie Hawkins series because I ran out and bought all three books when I was introduced to them right off the bat, and I got sucked right in. So, tell us a little bit about that series.
Well, it's fiction, but I like to blur the lines between fiction and nonfiction. And so it thrills me to hear that people question, is this real? Is this happening? Annie Hawkins Greene is a photojournalist, but not just a photojournalist. She is a conflict zone or war photojournalist, and her stomping ground is Afghanistan.
Mm.
And during her first trip to Afghanistan in Behind the Lens in the year 2006, um, she stumbles with she's embedded with the coalition forces, and they are delivering um, ready to eat meals and bottles of water to villages that have, in theory, been cleared of Taliban. And she stumbles into this village where they have been one time before, where she met a really feisty 10-year-old Afghan girl, a Pashtun girl, whom she liked a lot. And she wanted another chance to go back and photograph her. So there they are.
Mm.
And something happens in that village, which leaves Annie devastated. The little girl is shot and killed. Annie blames herself. And years later, 9 years later, she really feels a need to atone for this death, which really isn't her fault.
No.
And she goes back to Afghanistan, to the Panjshir Valley, which is a really peaceful part of Afghanistan. And she goes there to teach a photography workshop at the school directed by her best friend and college roommate, Daria Faludi. And while she is there, bad things happen.
Yeah.
In the second book, Double Exposure, Annie's own daughter, who is 16 years old, named Mel, has a fundraiser with a number of her friends, and they raise money to rebuild the Wat Cole School for Girls in the Panjshir Valley. Um, and they have Annie deliver the funds. And so while Annie is there overseeing and photographing the construction of this girls' school, bad things happen. Fast and through all of this, Annie has PTSD, and there's this lovely little romantic twist. The U.S. Navy SEAL who rescued her in Behind the Lens, um, they have a love story that develops through all three books. Fast forward to 2021, and Annie decides the story of her career would be to go back to Afghanistan, her PTSD notwithstanding, and to cover the story of the Taliban sweeping across Afghanistan and retaking control of the country. And so she does. And we frame bad
Something
things
bad's going to
happen.
happen.
So it's
Oh,
women's fiction with a lot of suspense, some elements of thriller,
Mhm.
and a lovely twist of romance.
And I love that twist of romance. I got to the one part where she gets the poem, and I'm like, "Oh, I love this. Oh," because you don't hear that enough.
I
W
fell in love with the Landes. I discovered them
ah,
total serendipity while I was researching Afghan food, of all things.
oh, interesting.
Found these Landes, which are 22 syllable
Right.
poems, almost always composed by Pashtun women, or they have been since 1680.
Wow.
And Pashtun women to this day are not allowed to learn to read or write. And if they do, that is considered dishonoring their family, and the family has a
Interesting.
right to execute them.
Oh,
And
wow.
this is a generalization. This is more
Right.
true in rural Afghanistan than in the cities. Um, but of course, women have creative thoughts, women love, women have
Right.
profound emotions. And so, even though they were being married off to husbands not of their own choosing, it was completely a tribal decision as to whom they would marry. These women would fall in love with other people, and they would compose these poems, which they would sing to their beloved as a cry of eternal separation. And more recently, other people in Afghanistan, other tribes like the Dari and the Tajiks have discovered the Landes,
Ah.
and boys as well as girls started writing them and crazily calling them into late night radio talk shows under pseudonyms.
Oh,
And of
wow.
course, the boy would call it in, the girl would know that pseudonym and be getting a message from that boy.
Wow, what a way to incorporate, like, something that has been around for a while with
Yeah.
technology now so that the beautiful written word, because they really are gorgeous, like, is intertwined into society now, right? How that's really cool.
Yeah. And as soon as I discovered them, I said, I need to use these throughout the entire
Right?
series, as character reveals, as plot points. And so I did. But even though I thought, oh, I'll just call the anthologizers of the two books that I discovered and bought and get their written permission to quote them, and I'll
Right.
document it and everything. And they turned me down.
Oh.
And so I was left in a position where I had to write my own.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And
I love that.
so I did, and one of the twists I put on it is that Annie's love interest, Sorelli, the U.S. Navy SEAL,
Mm,
is considered to be one of the great Landais writers. So I also like
yeah.
playing with gender twists.
Yeah, I loved that, and the description of it when she finds it, she's like, "Surely this can't be for me." We all need them. We all need them written for us.
We do, we
We
do.
really do. Um, so I just loved Behind the Lens, and there's so many, like, fantastic scenes that sucked me right in, and when we talked about you reading a little bit, I had a hard time really thinking about what I want you to choose because, like, I really felt like I was in the book. So, I'm hoping that you were able to choose one and that you'll read for us.
Well, I know it's kind of silly, but my favorite scene in the book always makes me cry,
Oh,
which is just crazy because I wrote it. So I'm going to read one that doesn't make me cry. And
okay.
it's near the very beginning of the book. It, in fact, is in the first chapter. And it's when Annie has gone to this little village that Kaliwali, which they think has been cleared of Taliban, but has not. And she is starting to photograph the little girl, the little 10-year-old girl, Malale. My ability to speak Pashto is embarrassingly limited, but the first thing I made sure to learn, may I take your picture? Malale bites her lip, glances back toward the house, then braces her shoulders and nods, ho. That quick look stops me. I'm torn. I want to take her picture, but don't want to get her in trouble again. Just do it. I tell myself, take a shot or two, then let Malala get back to her life here. The perfect golden light from this morning is long gone. I'm dealing with dead, flat, gray, and deep dark shadows. I meet her and press the shutter. Then I kneel in the sand and capture an image of her looking down at me, sharp features, a strong girl. Unexpectedly, Malale's eyes light up, and she kneels next to me. Using her index finger, she haltingly swirls letters in the sand, then looks at me. Through the viewfinder, I see the pleading in her eyes. But I don't read Pashto at all, much less the word Malale is scrawling. My finger freezes on the shutter. Malale is writing. Pashtun girls in remote villages don't write. Under Taliban rule, they weren't allowed to learn to read or write. Education for girls still isn't allowed in many areas, but Malale is most definitely writing. I come up onto my feet and frame the shot. Malale hunched over her letters, her face tips up toward me. The word below her just visible. This time, when I click the shutter, my fingers begin to tingle. The world drops away, and I'm in my moment, the place I feel best. Fighting the darkening sky for some light, I shift my position. Malale doesn't move an inch, but her eyes follow me. Another click of the shutter. This is the shot.
And it goes on from there. Everyone has to read it because it's so good. So you know what happens. So I love Afghan history, Afghan culture. What inspired you to write the series in Afghanistan?
Well, I have to go back a little farther.
Okay.
I had written a novel that was actually set in Ciudad Juarez, featuring a character by the name of Annie Hawkins Greene, who was a human rights attorney for the United Nations High Commission on Human Rights. And she was leading a team down to Ciudad Juarez to investigate the maquiladoros, which were a whole huge group of factories run by mostly American companies that employed young women for horrific wages. They would be locked inside the factories for 12-hour shifts. They were not allowed to take more than the requisite break. If they got sick, well, they pretty much lost their job. And if any of these women complained, they disappeared. And at that time, if you traveled in Ciudad Juarez, which is a very dangerous place to travel, there were pictures of missing women hanging on every utility pole, on bridges, with the word desaparecida written across, disappeared, and the name, begging for help. And I mean, hundreds and hundreds
Wow.
of girls and young women went missing. And sometimes you'd find their shoes out in the desert, whatever. So I was going to write that. And I did. And it was great. It was a fabulous book. And my writing group loved it. And then one of my beta readers said, this really doesn't hang together. It's like there are two stories here. And I reread it, and dang it all, if she wasn't right. So I shelved it and went on to another project. And then when I came back to the book, I picked it off the shelf and I said, I just can't stop thinking about Annie Hawkins Greene. Is there anything worth saving in this book? And I decided it was the character, Annie Hawkins Greene. And I said to her, what would you think of being a photojournalist? And she said, finally, you recognize who I really am. Right. And I said, well, I know photojournalism. This will work well. I know it a lot better than I know human rights law. And she said, but I'm a war photographer. So basically, I needed a war. And I wanted a war where there were coalition forces. I wanted a war where there were US Navy SEALs going in and running secret ops and black ops. And I wanted a war where there were a lot of moral and ethical dilemmas.
Hmm.
I had always loved Afghanistan since I was in college, and one of my suite mates, her family had emigrated from Afghanistan when she was a baby. And I've just always found Afghan people incredibly warm and hospitable, and they have a fabulously rich history and culture, especially their artistic and literary culture. So I said, yeah, all all roads lead to Afghanistan. And so then I set about trying to work on this book, and realized I was going to have to do a lot of research.
Well, well, as I was reading it, and we talked about this before we went live, like it's so incredibly real that if I hadn't done research about you, I would have thought that you were her off doing these things, because I have seen your photography and it is gorgeous. And there must have been so much research involved in this book, because you have the littlest details, and you have, you know, like it's so incredibly rich into the culture. So I would have never known that you personally were not there as Annie. What did that research process look like? How long did it take? Um,
I
yeah.
did a year's worth of initial research. And one of the first things I did was I met with some members of a local mosque here in Milwaukee. Um, 10 members plus the imam and his wife, and we sat down for hours, and they gave me a stack of Qurans, all with different translations, and then another stack of all kinds of information about Islam, because I'm also not Muslim.
Right.
And I had come up with the germ of an idea, and it focused on Seema, and
Mm.
who is Annie's goddaughter, her college roommate's Daria's daughter. And I said, would it be plausible if Daria returns her family to a peaceful area in Afghanistan to direct a girls' school? Would it be plausible that Seema would fall for someone in the Taliban? And they they ran with my idea, and they said it would absolutely be plausible.
Right.
And I mean, we had a wonderful conversation that, as I said, went on for hours. And they were very specific. They said, what you need to understand is that there is a vast difference between Islam, which is a religion of peace and
Right.
charity and giving and love, and what gets nationalized.
Right.
Um, for example, for the Taliban, and they specifically cited the Taliban to say that girls and women should not be educated, and that is what it says in the Quran. That is simply not true. In
Right.
the Quran, it says that just like men and boys, women and girls should be educated over the course of their entire lives. And it does not say that women must wear a burqa or a hijab. What it does say is that women, like men, should dress modestly.
Right.
And that what the Taliban and ISIS and Al Qaeda are doing is perverting the Quran, perverting the word of Islam. And so I left that meeting with the very strict instructions that you need to differentiate between Islam and what is specific to a culture, what is a social dictate.
Right.
So then I went into the research more in depth. I spent a year chasing down rabbit holes, um, and what I wanted to do was not do information dumps. What I wanted to do was just feather in things lightly, so I might spend hours researching something to have it appear in one sentence. I was also very fortunate because my brother was a retired naval officer.
Oh,
And so he was very helpful with all things military and all things Navy. And one of the members of my writing group and her husband were are lawyers, so they were very helpful, especially in book 2 in Double Exposure. And then in book 3, I had um, some PTSD therapists who were
oh,
very helpful. So anyway, back to Behind the Lens. I mean, I was world building, and so I said it's going to take as long as it's going to take.
right.
The I wrote the first draft probably in a year, and then spent another year revising. So it probably all told took me 3 years. And when we were in the middle of edits, I had a lovely contract from traditional contract from 1016 Press, which is a small regional press. And we were in the process of editing the book. And I decided, I really need a cultural sensitivity reader because I really want to make sure I got this right.
Right.
And that was hard to find. I went back to the original mosque. It had totally changed from when I was
Oh,
there,
wow.
and they were not interested. So a friend of a friend of a friend put me in touch with a woman in Hollywood, California, and I
Oh,
cold called her. She is the director of the Islamic. It's IMAC. Um, and let me get in the acknowledgments. I always get it wrong. Ah, um, the Muslim Public Advisory
mhm.
Council, Hollywood Bureau. And I told her what I wanted, and there was this long pause. And she said, "Really?" She said, "Authors never call us until they're in trouble.
Oh,
We don't get calls from people ahead of time." And so she was so excited that I had called that she said, "I know exactly who would be perfect for this project." The wonderful Heba El Kobaitri. But right now she's working with the History Channel project. They ended up taking her off that project to read my book.
oh, wow.
And she read it, and she was fabulous. And there is one chapter where Annie and Seema are sitting underneath in a walnut tree grove next to the school.
Mhm.
And Annie is trying to convince Seema that Seema's boyfriend is wrong, that girls should get an education.
Mhm.
And I had drafted this and done a lot of quoting from the Quran, mostly because I was very proud of myself that I had read all of these Qurans. And when Heba read that, she said, "I don't think you've quite understood exactly on what this should say." It was a real wonderful learning process. She was explaining every single word to
Oh,
me.
wow.
And so I finally decided that the chapter was actually boring and that the point of the chapter was not for me to have read the Quran. The point of the chapter was to move the story along.
Right.
And so I rewrote the chapter, and that was thanks to Heba.
Wow.
So what a joy of an experience to work with her on these books.
Yeah. That had to be like, I don't know, kind of like mind blown that they're taking her off of a History Channel project to do this. And that had to be so incredibly meaningful for you.
Well,
Because,
she wasn't off it for long, and they weren't going to take her off it, but then
right.
she got into the book
Oh,
and couldn't put it
yeah.
down. So that was
Yeah.
sort of how that happened.
Yeah.
But
Well, I hope everybody does read it because as much like it sucks you in so quickly, and like I said, you feel like you're in there with Annie in the research, and like you feel like you're there, and so that's incredible. And I want to live in that research process with you because I love that digging sort of thing. So that yeah, I wish I was a fly on your shoulder for that part because that would have been really really cool. Um, so I've done some reading about your background, and of course I feel like I have this little connection because I'm an educator, and I teach reading, and I love it. And I saw that you were an English teacher, and I was like, ah, and you're off doing these things that I have always dreamt about doing, that not just me, a lot of women, either have switched careers or, switched to teaching or education or whatever. And then like, okay, there has to be more for us. And I want to go do this and this and this and this, and share that with kids. And there's this big, huge, thing I think as educators we want to do, but like it's scary. And I read your background, and then I thought, man, that is like got to take a whole lot of courage to leave teaching and switch really careers, to go into photojournalism and into photography and then into writing. So how did that happen? How did you decide one day that, maybe I'm not going to be an English instructor, professor, and I'm going to go follow my dreams? Because I think that's important for all of us at no matter what age to look at people that we admire and say, hey, look at the wonderful things that you can do too.
I would not say I woke up one moment and made that decision. It took several years. And the start of it was my father was dying, and I was visiting him for what turned out to be the final time um, in the hospital, and he was in and out of consciousness. And lucky for me, I sat down next to him, and he woke up, and he took my hand, and he said, "Don't die with regrets."
Hmm.
And that was the starting moment. And when I had been teaching, I was often scheduled to teach at 1 in the afternoon. And it so happened that that was when photography students and art students had the slot in their schedule when they could take a writing or a literature course, because the rest of their time was on these long, long studios in the morning and the afternoon. And so I was hanging around a lot with photographers and their faculty members. And I sort of got interested in it. I ended up going on what turned out to be my first photo shoot to Zimbabwe. And I got there a little ahead of time. And I met with a sangoma. And a sangoma is the Ndebele word for a healer and a seer. And in the West, they're often called witch doctors, but healers and seers. And one of the ways they heal is to throw the bones. And he had 4 probably chicken bones. And you're supposed to put them in your hands and hold them, warm the bones. And he said, now think carefully about your problem. I'm like, I don't have a problem. I'm living the life I want to live. I'm defined, And he said, no, no, everybody has just think about it. So I hand him back the bones, and he throws them onto the mat that's on the floor between the two of us. And he looks at them, looks up at me, and says, you did not concentrate on your problems. He picks up the bones, puts them back in my hands, and I'm like, okay, let me concentrate. And I thought back to my father, and okay, what am I going to regret? What am I doing wrong? And I hand him back the bones. He throws the bones, and he said, oh, this time you concentrated. And I had told him nothing about myself other than my name. And he said, you are an English teacher. And that gave me the chills. And he said, but you're not sure if you should continue doing that. Well, at that point, that thought hadn't really occurred to me.
Right.
And he said, you have other stories to tell, but you spend so much time with your students that you can't tell your stories. You don't have enough time to write them. And you need to decide what will make you happy. So I thought that was pretty Twilight Zone-ish.
And you have to follow his instructions, because like,
so I went back to my teaching job. I mean, I did what any normal person would do,
Right.
A year later, I was in Honduras on the Mosquito Coast on a narrow gauge train. And I was being eaten alive by mosquitoes, because there are a lot of mosquitoes on the Mosquito Coast. And we're going through this jungle, and out of the corner of my eye, I see this woman with a big stick pounding it into what looks like a stocking. And I turned to my fixer and I said, what is she doing? And he said, I don't know. Do you want to find out? I thought we'd stop the train, run over, find out, get back on the train. He taps the engineer on the shoulder. The engineer slows the train. My fixer grabs my hand. I grab my backpack of camera gear, and we go sailing off the train.
Oh, wow.
And as I'm watching the train leave, I said, when's the next train? And he said, next Tuesday? Is that a problem?
Oh.
So we go find the woman, and I'm taking some photographs of her, which she's given me permission to do. And she is making cassava flour from cassava root. And she said, oh, would you like to go to my village? Because my sister is going to make cassava tortillas with this flour. And so we go to this open air kitchen where her sister is literally making these gigantic cassava tortillas over an open fire. And these two sisters were the primary earners for their entire village, $20 a week to make these cassava tortillas, which some guy came and picked up and took to Miami and would pay them $20 a week. So I'm taking all of these photographs. It was 120 degrees. It had to be, with the humidity. And I am just dripping down my cameras, shooting film. My fixer is there wiping down one camera as I'm shooting with another. And then we hear this chant around us. The entire village has turned out, and they're chanting, National Geographic, National Geographic.
Oh.
And so anyway, that came to an end as we're hiking out of this jungle on the railroad tracks. I decided that feeling of soaring off that train and then being able to take these photographs and to start a photo essay documenting the working lives of women and children around the world meant a lot to me. And how many times did I want to reteach this, basically the same stuff year after year? It had been great. I loved it. I truly thought of myself as an academic, but I also decided that it was time to move on. And so I went home and resigned my tenure.
Wow, and this is why you're called Indiana Jones.
With a camera.
With the camera, like, wow, like, I can't even imagine, and it's, like, things you dream of, like, I would love to do that, and people often ask me, "If you weren't a teacher, what would you do?" And I'm like, "I'd wanna be off in Africa, like, helping kids learn to read and write and, getting them supplies and those kinds of things. Because teaching is my 2nd career, and I love it, but that feeling every, few years of the monotony part of it and all these other dreams and how do you just like leave life? So that's really inspiring. And I can't imagine going back to a classroom after that, after you've jumped a train and wondered how you're going to get back to civilization and just that experience.
Well,
Incredible.
every photo shoot, I take in school supplies and
I
I
love
always
that.
build in a visit to at least one school.
I love that.
And so I've sort of got these schools all over the world now.
Oh, I love that. I ideas are coming into my mind
Oh,
to
good,
help.
good.
That would be fantastic. Yeah. Um, what's the scariest experience you've had in your photography
Yeah,
adventures?
I have to pick one.
You can say a few. I would love that. I
Okay.
think our watchers would too.
I was climbing Kilimanjaro. This is my adventurer scary experience. I was climbing Kilimanjaro and we were on the Western Breach, which is a 2,500-foot climb from 16,000 feet to 18,500 feet. And I have vertigo. And
Oh,
when I agreed to do this, it didn't occur to me that the Western Breach was really a breach. It's a sheer wall and it's a
oh,
footfall of, I don't know, maybe 18 inches that you go up. So it's not a technical climb. Um, and my the man I had just married, my husband, was right behind me, and one of the guides was right in front of me, and I got vertigo, and I stepped off into thin air, and
oh my,
both guys seemed to realize something was up, and my husband caught me under one arm, and my guide caught me under the other,
oh,
and I said, "I've got to go down," and they said, "You can't go down. There is no way to go down."
oh,
So I had to summit. I had to go up the rest of the way. Um,
oh, wow.
a here's us, and but I was able to use that in behind the lens as Annie is climbing a mountain, and the way that you actually climb and your footwork climbing, that was directly from Kilimanjaro. Um, I
Wow.
had an interesting experience. I was on a photo shoot in Namibia. I was photographing Himba women, and we were moving on to another photo shoot the next morning. And so, but I had packed up everything, taking special care of my cameras and making sure all of that was packed up. And we had an early wake up call, 4 a.m. And we're actually in a lodge in the middle of the desert. And at about 3 a.m., I hear this pounding on my door, yelling, "Wake up, wake up." And I'm like, "I have another hour to sleep. Go away." And he's like, "No, madam, open the door. Open. I'm awake. I'm awake. Believe me, I'm awake. Just go away." And "No, madam, I must see your face. Open the door." So I go over, and it was one of my fixers, Perez, and he said he was also standing there naked. It was quite entertaining, and he said, "The lodge is on fire. We must run for our lives." And
Oh,
so I step out and I look, and oh yeah, the lodge is on fire.
oh my gosh.
So I grabbed my camera gear and we went off and sat in the middle of the Namib Desert for the rest of the night, watching the lodge burn to the ground.
Oh my goodness.
So those are two. Those
Oh,
were both
wow.
scary, but
Okay, so
useful for
you're
my books.
right. Um, I would love to have all those experiences, but I am deathly afraid of spiders and snakes.
I have a snake story.
I would love to hear the snake story because I have an 11-year-old who loves them. He wants to
Mm.
be a zookeeper to take care of exotic reptiles, including the world's deadliest snakes. And I'm like, really, Grace? So I would love to hear that story.
Okay, well, I was in Zimbabwe and we had broken for lunch, and I was sitting under a tree having this lovely meal. And my fixer says, "Come away quickly, right now." And I stand up, and there, arching out, is a black mamba, which is olive. I mean, it's called a black mamba because when it opens its mouth, everything inside is black.
For death.
And so I had this crazy thing going for a few years that the best way to get over my fear of snakes was to photograph them. So
Oh,
I'm there
wow.
photographing this black mamba, and snakes are, they can't see you and they can't hear you, but they feel the vibration.
Right.
And so he's like, "You do know they can leap." And that's how they get you, is they leap through the air. So I
And you
did
took
get the picture, but I'm
photographs of them. Oh my gosh. I didn't find that one on your website. I'm going to have
like,
to. Is it on there? It's not
no.
there. My daughter would love that.
Well, I'll try to remember to
Oh.
post it on Facebook for her. What is your
Oh,
daughter's name?
her name is Grace.
Okay.
Yes, she just loves them, and I am deathly afraid of them and of heights, so I can relate to the vertigo thing too, and wow. Jamie, is asking where we can see your photos. So underneath my name, Jamie, is, Jeannee's, website, and I'll also post it in the group too. I can't type in the chat, because of the way StreamYard is, but I'll make sure that it's in our group too, because her photographs are incredible, incredible. And I looked at the elephant ones quite a bit. They're my favorite animal, and I wish I could go take care of them. That's like my life dream, and be cuddling one. And
Oh, yeah.
so I
I
stared at those for quite a while.
I had a wonderful photo shoot, probably one of the greatest shoots of my life. It was, literally thousands and thousands and thousands of elephants from
Ugh,
Botswana following their migration on, the Kaza Trans Frontier from Botswana down through
oh,
Zimbabwe's Bangui National Park, and it was phenomenal. It was
that has to be
absolutely,
life changing,
it really is.
because I can't even imagine it. Wow. Hmm, that's
I
pretty
when I travel, I collect moments, and
right.
that entire photo shoot was a moment.
Oh
I
yeah.
just loved it.
Once in a lifetime experience, I'm sure too. What is your favorite place to photograph? Do you have one?
I have to, I have many. I mean, I loved, being in far Western Mongolia. I loved Vietnam. I loved Laos. We're about to go to Tasmania to, photograph animals there. But my absolute, where my heart is, two places: Zimbabwe and, Sabi Sabi, which is a private reserve that is part of, Kruger National Park in South Africa.
Wow.
Madagascar is pretty great too.
I think we need to take all the admin team and go on an adventure with you.
It'd be great.
I would love that. Sorry, kids, I'll be back. I think my students would miss me, but I or my own children. See, I'm like, I'll go off an adventure, and I forgot about my own children. I was thinking about my students. um, what advice do you have for people who might be nervous to switch paths in life and pursue their dreams and to not have a life with regrets?
You
Do you have any
know,
advice?
I can't live for anybody else. I It was absolutely the right choice for me. Um, I will say that having a tenured professorship is a very secure way to live,
Mm,
monetarily secure. Um, you really don't have a lot of worries. It's not the best paying job in the world, but You've got to, you can pay for a place to live. You can pay to eat. You
Right.
pay for your expenses. And not everybody can do that. But my father said, don't die with regrets, follow your heart, and let your life soar. And
That's
if
great.
you can, and it took me years to do that. It took me about 5 years to get from point A to point B. And I made sure I had my bases covered, and I wasn't going to let myself be locked into that secure safety net that I had. And I
Yeah.
was okay. Um, so I'd let yourself fly and follow your dreams, but I'd prepare for it.
Right. Yeah. I think that's great advice. What's next in terms of projects for you? Because I love Annie so much as a character. Like, I know that this is a 3-book series, but are we going to get to see her again? And I haven't read the second 2. Um, so I don't know what happens to her in the end, but I would love to see her again. What are we going to see her again? What other projects are you writing about, and what's next in photography for you?
Well, I have just finished writing a book set without Annie, with an American cinematographer who is on a photo shoot filming a wildlife documentary in Zimbabwe when she's unfairly
Oh,
blamed for something that was not at all her fault. And she ends up being blacklisted by the film industry. To make
oh wow.
ends meet, she um, people help her get a job in the film department at the University of Wisconsin Milwaukee. 1 year becomes 4 years. Her visiting assistant professorship becomes a tenure track professorship, and she is catch 22 told you have to make a film to get tenure. So she rounds
Oh,
up some loyal friends and filmmakers, goes back to Zimbabwe, and makes a film about the mambas, not the snake, but a fierce, all female anti poaching unit that protects
oh wow.
endangered animals
Oh, this is
as
going
an
to be
effort
great.
to win tenure.
When is it
And
coming out?
well, I don't know. I am shopping it as we speak.
Oh, oh
So it's called
wow.
Talking Bones.
It sounds wonderful. I can't wait. Where's your next adventure for photography?
Australia and Tasmania for February and March.
Oh,
So I'm
nice.
very much looking forward to that. And then we're trying to um, organize a trip to Ladakh and in northern India and central India to photograph tigers and snow leopards. And probably after that, we'll go back to Zimbabwe because I can't be away from Zimbabwe for very long.
Wow. How do you decide where to go? How do you choose?
Sometimes I have clients, but most of the time it is what I feel like photographing.
Oh, I love that.
And so, for example, I had heard about the Golden Eagle Festival in far western Mongolia, and I knew it had my name written all over it. And so we did that. And anyway, it's pretty much where I want what I want to photograph. What has occurred to me.
That's
Also on my list
fantastic.
is I want to photograph the dance festivals in Bhutan.
Oh,
So that
fun.
will be coming down the pike at some point.
Yay. I'll have to keep watching your website. It sounds exciting. Um, so this is a pen pal group, and we all love books. We talk about books, read books, share books, trade books, everything about books in this group. But we
Mhm.
are a pen pal group. So if Annie Hawkins Greene were in our pen pal group, what do you think her introduction letter would say? Because we all write them to each other and tell about ourselves. What do you think hers would say?
Okay, well, I wrote one.
Oh, yay.
Dear Bookish Pen Pals, a little something about me to introduce myself. As a photojournalist, I tell stories through images, especially in conflict zones. Please don't think I'm into war or anything like that, because I'm not. I like to focus on civilians and how they're struggling to survive and live as normal a life as possible, which is often more of a dream than a reality. When I'm in country on assignment, I like to visit schools, mostly girls' schools, and bring books for them or maybe teach a photography workshop. But that's also a challenge because, at least in Afghanistan, girls' schools pretty much don't exist anymore under the new Taliban regime. Although I used to read, mostly poetry, with my best friend Daria when we were in college, I honestly haven't read much lately. I spend a lot of time in the field on assignment, and reading anything other than the news or a script isn't a priority. Not to mention that we don't have a whole lot of downtime. But I do love to listen to the Landes Sorelli composes for me. So romantic that they make my knees go weak. Seduction is guaranteed if he also gives me a glass of Blanton's bourbon. Now, though, I do have some downtime, and I could seriously use an escape. Maybe I'll take a look at my creator's new novel, Talking Bones. Signed,
Oh,
Annie Hawkins Greene.
I love it. That was wonderful. I want to be her pen pal. I think we all would want to.
Thank you.
Oh, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us and talking about your books and your work and your photographs, because they are beautiful. And um, I just can't thank you enough, because the book is wonderful. So I can't wait to now read the next one. So
Thank you
it's
so much.
next. So maybe after your next adventure, and or after the next book comes out, we can have you back on, because I'm sure our members will have all kinds of questions once they watch this too.
I'd love it. Thank you.
That would be fantastic. So Jamie says, thank you. I can't wait to see your photos. I love, there's a comment up here that says, oh no, not a black mamba. I would die. I would totally die. I would not photograph it. I would have fallen over. It would bite me. I would die. Well, thank you again. Um, it was just a great pleasure to talk with you.
And the pleasure was all mine. Thank you for inviting me on.
All right, thank you. Have a great night, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.